Hello, friends. I'm sure you're tired of me butting in at the beginning of episodes, but we're almost at the end of the season and there's a lot of important things to tell you. First of all, Achewillow Book 1 is now available for pre-order. Go to achewillow.com/book to see all the info. Second, and this is very exciting, in order to better stay in contact with you between seasons, we are starting a newsletter. There'll be updates, maybe some recipes, and behind-the-scenes info. To sign up, go to achewillow.com and scroll down to the bottom of the page. And thank you again for all your support. Achewillow Season 7 Chapter 14 A Third and Final Skull. 1 cream, 2 sugars. My brain doesn't even need to fire a single neuron to conjure the order, which is good, as I can't imagine demanding anything more of my body than the bare minimum. Curiosity getting the best of me, I try to calculate how many hours of sleep I've had in the last 3 days, but the best I can do is visualize a jumble of numbers in my peripheral vision, melting like some sort of surreal caramel kaleidoscope. 1 cream, 2 sugars, though. That's something I can work with. My weary shoulder struggles against the grinder's handle, making a struggle of turning beans into coffee grounds. I can thank the smell for what little perk I get back, which I immediately leverage into caution while using the coffee machine. Spitting brass and hissing pipes sing their song of aggression, and I dodge a splash of boiling water as I switch on the beast. 1 cream, 2 sugars. While the coffee percolates and drips into the old pot, I fetch the usual ingredients. 1 from a pot under the counter, and the other from a small porcelain jug in the refrigerator door. Setting a cup on a saucer, an Achewillow napkin sandwiched in between, keeps me from falling asleep here and now. There are still minutes to wait for the coffee to be ready, but anticipation serves as a stimulant in the meantime. Finally, after far longer than I would have preferred, the miracle elixir is ready. I pour a steaming cup that I then supply with the reagents for the ritual. 1 cream, 2 sugars. My potion complete, I put a tea towel on my arm and pick up the saucer, balancing the hot cup carefully as it gives off a soft rattle. Then I put the finished product, an enticing, wispy cloud emanating from its sand-colored surface, in front of an empty stool. In fact, the whole dining room is empty, as are the streets outside. Even the sky remains empty. But I know they're coming. I know because they haven't been here all morning. Not a minute of my preparations for the day have gone by that I didn't expect at least one of them to barge in, demanding an answer to this or an explanation to that. Mother knows I got more than my fair share of strange looks over the last dozen hours or so. The landscape of Achewillow itself has changed, and I suppose it's normal to turn an eye to the local witch for answers. Apart from a plate of food and a cup of drink, all I've had to offer customers is a weary look. 1 cream, 2 sugars. Neither of them drink that. One likes her green tea, while the other prefers a chai latte. But this is not a cup for them. The chimes of the Achewillow wake me, either from reverie or from actual sleep, and my heart sinks. They're here, or at least one of them is. She stands in the doorway, the flame in her hair having faded over the days, but replaced by a fire in her eyes. Who knew blue could burn so angry? "Tell me you found her," she demands. My slack jaw and vacant stare do nothing to answer her worries, and from the shadows under her eyes, I can tell she got no sleep of her own. "She never came home," Annabelle insists. "Tell me you found her." I blink, half surprised to find myself awake, and I shake my head. Part answer, part confusion, my thoughts struggle to find their place. Then the memories flood. bioluminescent eyes digging into mine while the portal rages like a broken Tesla coil. Nature itself splitting my life into two potential paths and demanding that I walk down one of them. My neck, like that of a broken doll, lets my head wobble as the shake turns into a nod. I did, I answer, surprised at the clarity of my voice. In the forest, near the Hell Gate. Annabelle drops her bag to the tiles and steps forward, a mask of relief quickly melting into fresh worry. Alive? Yes, I want to answer. More alive than ever. More alive than anything I've ever seen. Too much, I settle on. Too much alive? Again, I nod, this time with more conviction. Not knowing what to add quite yet, I go about putting a kettle on. What do you mean, too much alive? Where is she? Annabelle picks up her bag and rushes to the counter. The cup and saucer dance as she collides with the wood, a few drops of their contents splashing on the countertop. The sight gives me pause, but I'm not allowed to wallow in it. Miriam, where is she? What happened? I tell her the tale, starting with how I came back to the Achewillow, intent on finding a solution or a hint amidst my predecessor's belongings. Daunted by the impending failure of once again leafing through the recipe book or scrutinizing the framed pictures in my apartment, I didn't even put my key in the lock. Perhaps it was the urgency of the moment or fear of falling half asleep and having to face the crone in the mirror again, but I kept walking. I tell her of my counsel with patience, without giving an explanation about who he is. Was I going to tell her anyway? That I sometimes hang out and seek wisdom from a man who might be an angel or a demon or something else entirely. Then I tell her of our walk to the forest and our journey to the portal. And I suppose you're the one to blame? An irritating voice interrupts me. I wish I could call it a bad surprise, or a surprise at all, but the interloper is the second part of them I've been expecting. I'm glad she's late, coming in a little after Annabelle, but there was no avoiding her, not after this. I suppose I should thank her for having the tact to confront me early in the morning, before the Achewillow becomes a powder keg of questions I would rather not answer. Or perhaps she thought I would be an easier target if I were alone. In that case, it's Annabelle I should thank for beating her here. Ophelia smiles and crosses her arms, savoring a private little victory. It backfired, didn't it? She gloats. You went ahead and messed around with something bigger than yourself, and it backfired. Well, I'm here, so if you're going to ask for help, you're in luck. Head held high, she marches down to the counter. Her eyes linger on the cup of coffee, 1 cream, 2 sugars, but recognizes it for what it is. Knowing better than to mess with ritual, she sits on Annabelle's left. I didn't know what the results would be, I explain, for both of their benefits. So I wouldn't call it backfiring, but it is a lot more than I can chew on. I drop a spoonful of chai into an infuser that I place in a cup, which I then fill with boiling water. Let it steep, I order, sliding the cup over to Ophelia. Allowing her the time to settle in, I pour myself a cup of coffee too, mixing in equal amounts of raw sugar and cream, just enough to strike a balance. Where was I? The Hell Gate, Annabelle answers, casting a quick glance to her left. Ophelia, who's been playing around with the metal filter in her cup, freezes. She looks up, the words Hell Gate having sunken its thorns into her, demanding every drop of her attention. Right, I continue, making it clear I would entertain no questions on the topic. Patience was right. That's exactly where the goddess manifested, and it's where she took Pete. Except she didn't just move her body. It's like she digested Pete and then grew her back. But she didn't leave it at that. The sound of my spoon hitting the sides of the cup fills the dining room. As the sugar dissolves, I gather my thoughts, letting my mind fill with images of decaying life and nature reborn. She's using Pete, I continue, putting the spoon down. Like a vessel. I don't think we managed to free her, not completely. She offered me a deal, to either save Olivia's life or that she'd solve all my problems. I think she's offering to destroy the gate. I sip my coffee, looking over the rim of the cup at Ophelia, hoping that she sees in my gesture an echo of Olivia. But she doesn't. Her eyes flee mine, studying instead the bottom of her own cup, feigning to know when the tea is sufficiently steeped and can be drunk. For the record, it isn't yet. "What about Pete?" Annabelle asks, disregarding the dilemma. "Once I've made a choice, she'll be restored, reborn, returned, whatever that means." "It means you have to hurry and pick. What if this nature goddess changes her mind, or disappears? What if she doesn't even come through on her side of the bargain?" I want to tell her to calm down, but the panic she expresses resonates in harmony with the one I feel. It's why I can't sleep and can't think. My hands are tied, but I must do something. 2 of my friends have now fallen into peril, and in neither case do I have any power over their fate. Except for Petunia, I at least have a path I can go down, those ones shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. "She's not going to tear down the portal," Ophelia cuts in. "She can't. It's part of her. She's literally woven into it. You unshackled her hands, but her feet are still chained. I don't know about her granting favors, but what she wants is for you to finish the task, undo the portal." "And then what?" I ask. "Can I rely on her gratitude to give Petunia back? To save Olivia? I've already made enough deals I'm not sure about. I don't know if this is a gamble I'm comfortable with. Besides, I wouldn't know where to start tearing that thing down." "Well, lucky for you," Ophelia says, putting the steeper aside and raising the cup to her lips. "I might have an idea." Business is slow that day, a curse at any other time, but a blessing throughout the morning. Ophelia made her exit at the first sign of a customer. Like a priest caught in a house of ill repute, she seemed ashamed of being seen in my cafe. Talks of goddesses and hellgates were also shelved. When living in Achewillow, one learns the fine art of when it is acceptable to bring up ghosts and demons, and when it's better to keep up the facade of a quaint and unassuming village. The air was already charged with questions. Every villager wandered the street looking up at the sky. It was as if some great prehistoric beast was flying circles around town, or a fleet of alien spaceships hovered in a place above Rue Principale. Except it wasn't some unusual phenomena that held everyone's rapt attention, but rather its absence. We'd all become so accustomed to the great cloud casting a shadow over Achewillow that the day it disappeared, everything seemed to have changed. It reminded me of when my dad first shaved his mustache after keeping it for most of my life. Nothing was different about him, but also everything was. I popped out myself, taking a look skyward to see the great blue expanse with my own eyes. The cloud had always given Achewillow's sky a sort of floor. No matter what the weather, it felt like there was a limit to how far one could fall through the blue. There was always something to hang on to. Now, without any clouds to anchor the eyes, it felt like space itself was calling us up, drawing us away from the street and into the endless nothing. The same sight would have had no effect in Montreal or Boston or anywhere else, but here in Achewillow it was as alien as the rings of Saturn. Thankfully, the Pilvists never came, probably still reeling from the situation. If Ian were to walk Rue Principale, he'd be swarmed with questions. After all, wasn't he the guardian of the great cloud, its herald and prophet? Surely he knew that and would keep some distance for the time being. There were others, those in the know, who asked if I had any idea what happened. They'd nudge while getting their coffee, making poor attempts at subtlety. "So, cloud's gone," or "How about that weather?" they'd say. or a few were more direct, asking point blank what I knew. To all, I gave them their order and a shrug. At best, I'm just a kitchen witch. At worst, a lowly barista. What would I know of gods and great mysteries? The weather is warm as I step through the back door of the Achewillow. Stefan's taken over, freeing me to go about my business. And what business is that, you might ask? You came. The fox is sitting in the middle of the alley behind the Achewillow. Her orange fur looks especially bright under the untethered sun, reminding me of Annabelle's hair on her first day back. The bone of her skull glistens whenever she talks, highlighting that particular quirk of her being. I work here, I say, walking down the concrete steps. The fox's eyes, golden but for a hint of blue, stare at the carefully wrapped package in my arms. Her tongue goes over her lips, revealing sharp fangs in the process. Nervous legs push her up, and she prances in my direction with barely contained anticipation. But you came, and you brought my scarf, I expect. She's like a dog waiting for a treat, circling me and jumping to paw at my thighs every so often. I did. I started to walk, hearing the hissing of 2 raccoons peering from underneath the lid of their dumpster. They watch, angry at the fox, but uninterested in direct confrontation. Not while I'm around, anyway. Though I bet Crimson would love to have a go at the intruder. I don't suppose, the fox says, that you would be so kind as to give it to me then? An act of good faith before I go about my part of our arrangement. It's just, you see, I'm very cold. She shivers to underscore her complaint. Meanwhile, the sun kisses my bare arms, reminding me that I should start wearing sunscreen again. Standing outside the alley, a patch of wild grass on my left and the shadow of the Achewillow on my right, I ponder her demand. Surely she can handle being cold a little while longer until I get my payment and our books are balanced. After all, how long has the fox been without her scarf? Months at this point. And she is, as Patience said, a dead thing already. After a few more circles, the fox settles down. She sits in front of me, tongue lolling out of her mouth and cocking its head in anticipation. She might run if I give her the scarf. And then what? Would I ever see her again? She shivers. Sitting on the ball of my feet, I crouch down to her level. I put the package on my lap and proceed to unwrap it. Under the thin packing paper, muted red wool peeks out, the color rich and deep under the burning sun. To her delight, I wrap the scarf around the fox's neck. I hadn't realized how small an animal they could be, but the length of knitted wool seems to cover half her body when all's said and done. Part of me expects her to run, turning around to stick her tongue out at me once she's far enough to do so. Instead, she turns her face to the sky, eyes closed in what looks like absolute bliss. Her jaws open, then close, tasting the air in a strange but joyful manner. "Thank you," she says, and even her skull looks healthier. She jumps to her feet and runs off a few yards, then turns around. But instead of mocking my gullibility, she speaks again, head melting to bone every time. "Well, come along. I don't have all day." We walk through the back corners of Achewillow, a network of open yards and back alleys, dipping into a park and a few copses of trees. It's a world I've only ever brushed against. A way for an animal like the fox, or an occasional demon, to travel Achewillow without being noticed. Eventually, we make it to a gate at the edge of town. "Come on," the fox urges. "What are you standing there for?" She rushes through the wrought iron threshold, but turns back when she sees I'm not moving. The Achewillow Cemetery. "Have you never been here before?" I shake my head. Never been here? I didn't even know such a place existed. All of the funerals I've seen so far, and there have been a few, have been held in the graveyard next to the church. Never did it occur to me that there would be another burial ground, one for all those of other faiths and creeds. The place where those such as the Dufour witches might be buried. I take my first step beyond the fence and onto the gravel path that cuts through the grounds, enthralled by the moment. "Makes sense," I mumble. "Patience said you were a dead thing." "Ha!" the fox scoffs as she leads me through the headstones. "And what would he know about death? He'd have to at least have been born." "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know. He comes from what you call the Hell Gate. He wasn't hatched or birthed. He walked right in. He never grew up, and he'll never know death, not the way you and I do. And he has the gall to call me a dead thing. Ah, here we are." I can't say I'm surprised to learn that Patience isn't a garden-variety townfolk of Achewillow. I'd have been naive to expect him to be normal, and shouldn't be shocked that he might not be human. That he stepped out of the Hell Gate doesn't rattle me either. After all, he seems to know a lot about other demons that have spawned forth from there. But perhaps because I never gave it much thought, or because I never had all the pieces arranged together into an image, it didn't occur to me that he, too, might be a demon. While not new information, this fresh perspective barely has time to sink in before I'm forced to contend with another shift of worldview, or rather, an adjustment to my portrait of the village I now call home. Like adding a sprig of thyme atop a well-seared piece of meat, the negligible detail changes almost everything. Here lies Amelia Dufour, beloved daughter of Elaine Dufour and mother of Philomene Dufour, 1860 through 1916. 3 generations of my family, their names carved in stone before me. A jarring sight, for sure. For the longest time, the only branch I could trace comfortably between myself and the rest of the Dufour witches was those thin connections that led me to Doris. Here, etched in worn granite, I can see and touch the limb of the tree I've only ever heard of. More startling, though, is the ground itself. A stray thought would be enough to remind me that below my feet are the very bones of an ancestor. What little I know of Amelia Dufour, she was a compassionate woman, beloved by her mother and the community. She should be resting peacefully, undisturbed for over a century at this point, but that is not the case. The soil at the foot of her headstone is freshly disturbed. Though not as fresh as yesterday, someone dug through this earth long after the body was interred. And the culprit is right there, warming its nose in her dark red scarf. "Why did you bring me here?" I ask, worried about the answer. "We have a deal," the fox says, "and I intend to honor my end of the bargain. Unless, of course, you decide you want to call it even." Having a hunch of what comes next when I answer, it's tempting to accept the terms as they are. Already her paw's scratching at the ground, and she looks at me with coy, mischievous eyes. It's like she's daring me to tell her to go on, hoping I'll chicken out. But I can't. "We have a deal," I confirm. As suspected, the fox begins to dig. Her paws move fast, scratching at the soil, liberating the smells of moist earth and disturbing worms and ants. Fortunately, she doesn't have to dig deep or long. It would have taken forever to excavate all 6 feet down to the presumed casket below. Though I'm glad to have furthered my connection to past family members, I don't need to make that connection too literal. Besides, I wouldn't want to be seen next to an open grave in broad daylight like this. "Here you go," she says, dropping a chunk of wood at my feet. I apologize for the dirt, but I did my best to keep it in good condition. I lean down to pick up the spoon, brushing the caked-on soil and flicking a scarab off the handle. I'd forgotten how heavy Philomene's spoon was for a kitchen utensil, how thick and dense the wood of it was. "That's fine, I can wash it off. It's not like I was planning on using it to cook, anyway. I have to ask, though, why did you steal it in the first place? What need does a fox have for a wooden spoon?" The fox busies itself filling in the hole above Amelia's grave, careful and reverent as it does so. "It's a dangerous souvenir. History has an intent of its own. You can't build a connection to something, or someone, and not expect it to retain something of yourself. And that's a path that travels in both directions. I thought it better this spoon not be in your hands. I turn it over in my hands, exposing it to sunlight as if it could help me see the malice in it. To my naked eyes, all I see is grain and crude carving. No evil, just chaos. I suppose we're done here? I ask, with a little regret. A string tied to my past is about to be severed, and I'm not sure what to do about it. You sound disappointed, the fox replies. I wish I had more to offer, but I'm just a fox after all. She's the one who likes to watch over people like you. In fact... Her living eyes squint with mischief, and she sniffs at the air. She walks to the next grave over, and, without warning, she jumps up and dives nose first into the ground. Instead of burying her jaw in the dirt, however, she vanishes through the soil, as if it were water, or not there at all. Left alone in the cemetery, I look around, drinking in the sights. I notice some weeping willows lining the back of the grounds, their pale green leaves swaying in the timid wind. A skull pokes out of the ground where the fox disappeared. At first, I expect it to be hers, but she isn't talking. After a moment, the animal pulls herself out of the undisturbed soil, shaking off invisible dirt. Here, she says, dropping a piece of bone at my feet. Go ahead, take it. I lean down to take the item. It's a human skull. Small and filthy, it looks up into my eyes with empty holes. And right there, between those holes, there's a branded sigil burnt into the forehead. Bones and remains are nothing new to me. I used to work in a butcher shop. I've carved my fair share of meat off of skulls, but none of them were human. None of them had signs of ritual. No, the fox adds. I insist. Hands trembling, I turn my head to look at the neighboring headstone. It's newer and simpler. Unadorned with useless carvings and sculptures, it has the charm of modesty. A few ornate designs frame the etched name of the deceased, like a humble bed upon which to rest. And that name, as I suspected, is Doris Dufour. The sun still burns the streets by the time I get back to the Achewillow Cafe. Thinking about it while holding the paper-wrapped skull in my hands, I come to the conclusion that events are now proceeding of their own accord. The sky had been gray and angry for a long time, seldom allowing light to come through unfiltered. In retrospect, every thunderstorm and every weekend drowned by rain feels like the goddess we freed was rattling the bars of her cage. Like a piece of crumpled up paper, the situation was already unfolding without my intervention. Though the creases would never have ironed out on their own, eventually order would have been restored. It may have taken years if I hadn't come along to flatten it out with my clumsy hands. When I get to the cafe, it's only to find that the chickens have come home to roost. Like an oven set on a timer, events were put in motion when Petunia Marshall disappeared from the Pilvist house. It was inevitable that time would run out and the oven would chime. Except the chimes come in the form of shouting, and what's ready is yet another unpleasant encounter that needs to be dealt with. Where is our daughter? Sonia Marshall screams from the front of the register, bellowing anger and anguish in equal measures. Her anger isn't directed at Stefan, who waits patiently for the storm to abate before making a move, but rather at Annabelle. Petunia's mother couldn't have picked a worse target for her demands. For as long as I've known them, there's been animosity between the Marshalls and Annabelle. Sonia and Matthew have always disapproved of her. While they needed an obedient daughter, her friend encouraged rebellion and dissent with her every breath. If Annabelle could stand up to her mother, the sternest pillar of Achewillow's government, was there any institution she wouldn't thumb her nose at? And they were right. Annabelle never liked the Pilvists and hated them even more after they drove her best friend away. "I wouldn't tell you before, and I certainly won't tell you now," she spits back, ready to stand and defend herself if need be. I've never seen Annabelle in a fight, though I know her to be as comfortable in taverns as she is in the cafe. Unless things turn supernatural, it takes a lot to rattle her, and I worry that a middle-aged cloud worshipper isn't going to be enough to browbeat her into submission. In fact, I bet Annabelle is itching to throw a punch. "You know where she is," Sonia snarls. "You know, and I swear if my daughter is in any danger and you kept us from coming to her aid." Stefan and I exchange a tired look. He raises the fingers in his hands. First there's 9, then only 1, then again only 1. It's tempting to let him call, but I see no positive denouement if he does. Both sides are noisy, disruptive, but the only real crime they're guilty of is giving me a headache. As the decibels and aggression escalate, I shake my head to tell Stefan that I'll be handling this one. With a sigh and a weary step, I make my way around the counter and between Ms. Marshall and Annabelle. They barely notice me until smack! The thick and heavy spoon, still caked in dry mud and soil, impacts the varnished countertop. Cutlery and cups rattle, and someone at the back of the dining room yelps in surprise. I expected the spoon to crack or splinter, and I can feel the bones in my hand vibrate from the impact, but the wood remains intact. Silence echoes, the opponents suddenly quieted by the violent crash. Surprised, afraid, they turn to look at me. Sonia's eyes are wide and look like cocktail onions, pale and moist. They speak of her distress and frustration. Even Annabelle, my friend and ally, seems unsure of my motives. From the corner of my eyes, I can see it too. The weary lines that trace my features are reflected on the brass tubes of the coffee machine. I'm more apparition than witch, and more wraith than cook. I believe even Helen Edna would take pause at my presence. Then there's the spoon. It weighs more than it should, and I'm starting to understand where that mass comes from. Philomene has always been described as the weird one in my lineage, the wild witch of the Achewillow Cafe. There's power in such unrestrained freedom, and I bet that power lends Philomene's spoon more heft. "Enough," I say, calm and fatigued. "Petunia is fine. She's an adult, and if she wants to see you, she'll see you, Ms. Marshall. And if she doesn't, that's her business." I point the spoon at her for emphasis, though I suppose it comes out more as a threat. So be it, I think. I'll take obedience and respect in whatever flavor it's served. But Sonia Marshall isn't that easily mollified. "This is my daughter you're talking about," she seethes. "First, you help her run away with that boy. Then you crawl into my church and destroy it from within. And now you presume to keep me from my Petunia again? Mark my words, Miriam Dufour. You are dealing with forces far beyond your understanding." While her tone clearly hinted that she might ask for the manager at any moment, her words still manage to resonate long after she storms off. "Empty threats," Annabelle says as the ambient sounds of the dining room pick back up. There remains hesitation in my customers. It's one thing to brush off an altercation with an angry customer, but quite another to see it end with attempts at intimidation. Not to mention insinuating my participation in the Great Cloud's disappearance. "Sure," I mumble back, lowering my spoon. I stash the wrapped skull under the counter, hidden between bags of coffee. Pausing for a moment, I wonder what Doris would think of this arrangement for her remains. Right now, however, it's the spoon that holds my attention. Wrapped by its thick grain and rich essence, I get the urge to return it where it belongs and restore it to its former glory. Without another word, I turn around and bring the spoon to the kitchen. There, I thoroughly wash it, running warm water and scrubbing every last trace of cemetery soil from its surface. Annabelle has followed me, handing me a dish towel as if we were cleaning any random old plate or cup. "You know," she says, "while I'm not Ms. M's biggest fan, I have to agree with one thing. I'd love to be as confident as you are about Pete's safety. I think to myself that I must be a better actress than I thought, because confident is not how I feel about this ambiguous bargain at all. Looking at the spoon, I wonder if I should perhaps give it a rub of linseed oil, take comfort in having come out on top in my dealings with the fox. I think. All I need is that same luck when taking down the portal, that I'll be given back my friends. Goddess said Pete was fine, I reply, wiping the spoon dry. She said I could even save Olivia, or... I trail off, unsure what the other option was. We're already unraveling the Hell Gate. What else could the nature goddess offer? Or, Annabelle asks. I shrug, unsure what to add. With Stefan's help, I hang the spoon back over the register. There, it swings for a moment before going still. A family portrait of the Dufour witches complete once more, each utensil a painting of their individual personalities, if not their appearance. Stepping back, I look up and savor this small and insignificant victory. The mystery of the missing spoon is solved. All is fine with the Dufour dynasty. My phone vibrates in the pocket of my apron, and I ignore it. I know far too well what to expect when I fish it out, and every second of ignorance is a blessing I cherish. It vibrates again, then again. With each insistent pull on my attention, the satisfaction drains from me until, eventually, there's none left to linger in. Olivia was taken to the OR again. The bypass isn't healing correctly. Pray for her. Henry Figg. I'm running out of time. Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.